So tell me when and where you were born.
I was actually born in Austin, Texas, the old Brackenridge, September 22nd, 1949, and that was a Thursday. And my mother said for the people of color, she was in the basement next door to the morgue. That's where the maternity ward was. I said, no wonder I don't like basements. But yes, I'm an Austin. We used to say Austinites. They're a bit more posh now, Austonians or something.
We say Austinites.
Yeah, I'm an Austinite. But yeah, I was born here in Austin.
What are your parents' names?
My mother is, they claim my grandmother wanted a boy. Her name was Eddie Lorraine Simeon. And a lot of old people pronounce it Simmons, but it was actually a French word, Simeon. And Simeon is her maiden name, but she was married twice, so she was Eddie Lorraine Simeon Monroe Williams. So I have a set of Monroe siblings and a set of Williams siblings.
Mm-hmm. What are some of your siblings' names, and what was your father's name?
My father's name was Dudley Giles Monroe, and senior, since one of my brothers is a junior. The Monroe siblings, Dudley, William, who are still alive, and James and Robert, who have passed away. The Williams siblings, Charles, Artie, David, and Angel Renee. So it's 4 of them still living. So yeah, it was quite a big family, but it was stretched out, so we weren't all at home at the same time.
Who were your grandparents?
My maternal grandparents was Grace Elizabeth, maiden name Horst, Simeon Johnson, and the grandfather was John B. Simeon.
How many generations back does your family genealogy research go?
Sadly, due to slavery, I've hit that semi-brick wall. I can go back, like with the slave owners, to the 1700s or so. The Simeons were from Marseille, France, and it seems like most of the family are so proud of them. They've actually been to Marseille, and I got a bit more information on them on the chart. But and plus, they were never slaves, so it's records for them. The one Simeon who was a slave was freed and baptized in the Catholic Church. So there's still a lot of information about the Simeon family. But the others, like the Horst family, I know that my great-great-great-grandfather was from Darmstadt, Germany. The family talked more about them than anyone. And his wife supposedly was from Bavaria, but I found her maiden name was Krebs, and she was born in the Netherlands. But I guess they grew up in Germany, or she moved to Germany. But so I can't go back that far, but for the slave owners, I can. And the Monroes were from Scotland, in Inverness, Scotland. They moved to Ireland, from Ireland to Virginia, from Virginia on to Texas. So a lot of people tell me, oh, you're from Louisiana. I said, no, my Monroe ancestors were from Inverness, Scotland. And on the 1870 census records, they actually spelled it the Scottish way, Munroe. So we're kind of, from all over.
Tell me about your children and grandchildren.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I have 2 sons, and by the first husband, Michael Claiborne, he's a junior, and Ashley Claiborne. It's actually Bennett Claiborne. I did ask them if I could use their names, and they said, oh, we don't care. But I was determined that both of them would get a good education. So they went to school quite a long time, and then I wanted them to finish school and get a job. And my sons are so funny talking about the little darlings. They said, I like senior places. And they said, but Mama, it'll make you get old. And I'm like, once you pass the big 70, you're already old. And so I said, those are my people. So I thought that was really funny. They don't think I'm old yet. So, so I'm from a really big family. And they only get along and get together when we have funerals or something. They act nice. And but it's hard to keep them all together. And that's why this last group of family history cookbooks, I had 55 copies made, and it's cheaper to have them printed in England, and gave each of my siblings a copy and all of their grown children a copy so that they would know.
Where were you in the birth order with your siblings?
I'm actually the fourth. The Monroe children, or my siblings, are the oldest group. My mother got married, she was like 18, to Dudley Monroe Sr. And, had the four Monroe children. And then she married Reverend Williams and had the younger bunch, the Williams children. But she raised us all as the same. And she used to tickle me because she would say, only my children were her real grandchildren. And I said, Mama, you're going to start a family, uproar if you say that to anyone else. I said, we're all your children and grandchildren. But, my mother was such a nice person. It was all we knew. Our world was East Austin. So it was all we knew. So it was happy times for me. And just being around your relatives lived close, because back then East Austin was small. So it was lovely.
So tell us about where you were raised and where your family lived.
Well, actually, 2015 Paquita Street. And it ran from Rosewood Avenue down by the projects all the way up to Manor Road. And my family lived up and down Paquita Street. Some of my grandmother's sisters, so some of the aunts and uncles lived there off of Paquita Street. My great-grandmother, Sarah, I didn't mention that I was actually named, my name is Sarah Grace, but my great-grandmother was Sarah Shackleford Horst, and my grandmother was Grace Elizabeth Horst. And so I was named after those two. And so they lived at 1919 East 12th Street, which they tore that house down, but I bought some old pictures. It was weird. The back of the house faced 12th Street, with steps going down the hill. The front of the house was on the level part, and it had 2 lemon trees on each side of it. My mother planted a pecan tree that she actually ate pecans off of. She planted the tree when she was a child. And they had a smokehouse. So, but Grandma Grace and my mother lived further out, closer to Manor Road on Paquita Street. But relatives all up and down that one street. And it was cousins. The Fosters are cousins. They were also on Paquita Street. And it was just a kind of small world up and down Paquita Street. The nice thing about it, you knew people all up and down the street. So if something happened, if anything, you had someone to go to. But usually nothing happened because you could tell they were watching you as you walked down the street. So, but it was really nice. It was a comfy feeling. It was like just living in a little tiny town with your relatives. So that's the way I felt about it. But that's where about the first 10 or 12 years of my life, I lived on Paquita Street. And we walked to school, you walked to church, you could walk downtown. And we talk about Oakwood, I was going to mention that. That was my knowledge of Oakwood, just walking by it. We would cut through sometimes. But I used to walk by it all the time because we had friends who lived down this way. And I like walking on this side of the street where the cemetery was located because there was houses and people over on the other side. And so I just passed by. But the thing that impressed me, and I knew we had people buried here, they never brought me over here. They didn't really take us to funerals. I never, even my, this funeral, it was 1957. I remember standing on her porch at 1919 East 12th, looking at the hearse pass by. And unfortunately, I saw the casket. It was pink. It was that kind of fluffy looking material. And I could never get that out of my mind. It's one of those things like, I wish I could forget that. But no, I never came to a funeral here. And they didn't really bring me to visit any graves. But I knew it was here, and I knew it was old. And we used to just walk by it. Sometimes cut through the middle street there, going over to 12th. We would cut through because we had friends over there. It was a shortcut. So, but yeah, I knew it was here, and I knew it was old too. Just looking at some of the gravestones.
Did you remember any stories about the cemetery because it was so close to where you live?
Well, the only thing was, you know, sometimes they'd mention someone and say, "Oh, so and so's buried over there." They didn't forget, but they didn't really share with us too much. But I knew the Charles Horse's people were buried here, and it's the weirdest thing. I don't know where he's buried. 1880, I found him in El Paso, Texas, and that was it. But no, I knew about them because sometimes my mother would tell me, and you know, Grandma Grace, the Wells, both of those brothers should be buried here, but only one, William or Thomas, one of them is buried here. I have on my list. But so they would talk about some of the older cousins and things, you know, who are buried here. And I was surprised about the Shacklefords being buried here. And it's sad because some of the children that didn't make it, one little girl died the same day she was born. And another one lived 9 days, but they were here. And sometimes they would talk about them because my family named children after each other. So one little boy was named Christian after one of the horses' daughter married a Christian. And so they would say, you know, they talk about the babies and relatives here, but that was about it.
Where did you go to school?
Oh my gosh. My first school was Greater Mount Zion Nursery School. I then went to L.L. Campbell Elementary School, Keeling Junior High School, L.C. Anderson High School, Houston Tillotson, and when I graduated from HT, I went to Thurgood Marshall Law School at TSU. But I love school. And I majored in history and government because my history teachers were the nicest. And plus I liked reading about other people. And at one point, I worked myself out of a job. I was tutoring students in history, and they would pass, so the families didn't need me anymore. So but I've always loved history. And because I was a girl, I had to sit around the older women in the family. And so I heard a lot of the history before I started researching it. Well, first of all, I'm the only one in my family out of the 9 children who went to kindergarten. And because my Grandma Grace's sister, and this is funny too, in my family, everyone has a nickname. Her name was Beatrice Horse Edwards. She married at Edwards. And she worked at Greater Mount Zion Nursery School. So I had a chance to go to nursery school. But I liked school. I was one of those strange children that there was no problem for me to get up and go. My brothers hated it. I would be dressed, finish breakfast, reading a book, smirking at them as my mother yelled for them to get up and get ready for school. So L.L. Campbell was really nice. The only bad thing being in elementary school, I was tall. I got taller before the boys did. And they made you do line dancing and stuff, so no one wanted to dance with a girl taller than them. But no, I just love school. And my teachers at Keelan, that's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher. And at the old Anderson, I was quiet but I had my little group of friends, a little close-knit group, and we're still friends. And at HT, it was nice. I made the mistake of staying on campus. I was in Upward Bounds, and it was funny. All of my real good friends were in Upward Bounds, too. And I think that's the only reason I was able to go to college. And, you know, all of my friends who went to college, we were in Upward Bounds. But it was fun to me because I like learning. And most of my teachers I loved. I didn't ever really have a teacher I didn't like. It was subjects I didn't like. I don't like science, and it was disgusting going to that biology class because they had all these dead animals and snakes and yucky stuff.
Where were your family from before they lived in Austin?
Well, now, luckily, when I had my DNA test done, I found out all the stories that told me I actually have the DNA to prove it. The Monroe ancestors I've mentioned were from Inverness, upper northern Scotland area, and they came through to Ireland first, and then so in my DNA, the 1/4 is Great Britain, and 1/4 is from Togo and Benin and Africa, West Africa, and 1/4 is the German and French side, and then the other is just everything. So it's Irish and, you know, all these other countries that Syria, Afghanistan, Russia, and I'm like, I don't know what I am. So my doctor in England would say, just tell people you're mixed British. But my family was basically, the slave part, they just followed the slave owners. So Hugh Monroe, who was a slave owner, ended up in Gonzales, Texas, and had a store there. And that's where Moses Monroe and Sarah Monroe, you know, were, and met up and married. The Horse family, of course, the horse plantation, or the horses pasture, was located where UT is. They owned the land from right behind the Capitol all the way up to 51st Street.
Yeah.
And so that whole area, and you probably remember the, what was that hotel? It was there on 35 by UT. It was an old hotel, but that was where the slaves lived, right in that area, where that old hotel was. And the family mansion was on 26th and Speedway in that area. Supposedly it's still there. I saw it years ago. It was a native stone, you know, the honey-colored stone, and it was, it didn't look like a mansion to me. It just looked like a regular limestone house, but that's where the Horse family lived. So my family just kind of scattered. The ones in Austin stayed in Austin. The ones down in the country in Gonzales and DeWitt counties, where my great-grandfather Monroe was living. Some were in the Cuero area. And what was interesting to me, I was just absolutely shocked. One relative, well, ancestor actually, was an indentured servant. I just assumed everybody was a slave, but she was actually an indentured servant from Holland and worked for a family in Cuero, some doctor's family. So that was interesting. So, but yeah, they were just from all over. They kind of all met up in Texas, though. They ended up in Texas.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your childhood or your adolescence?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, the main thing, I did love growing up in Austin, because East Austin was smaller then. It wasn't, to us, it wasn't a lot of black people. You know all the people at church, you know all the people, and I had to call my brother to ask the name of this church. It was on Chestnut. I could not remember. It was Zion Hill Baptist Church. I have fond memories of that church, and I must have been tiny. I remembered the building, but I couldn't remember the name. And Greater Mount Zion, of course, I liked that church. But we all went to church. It was more of a community. Grandma Grace, they claimed she could make the best lye soap. So she would make a huge batch in those horrible, huge I guess they're made out of, they were black, cast iron or something. But she would make lye soap and cut it all up into little blocks or like cube things and give them to the neighbors. They would share. If somebody had a lot of potatoes or something, or they had a good crop of this, but it was so close-knit they would share with each other. It was, you know, my mother, back then being a girl, they did not play like nowadays. Kids can go out and they're out at night. I didn't do that. My brothers had more freedom than I would have had. But since I was a nerdette, I enjoyed reading the book, so I didn't care. But we did have to go to church. And all of my friends were the same way. They didn't. If we went somewhere, we had to have a chaperone. So we didn't just run around like kids can do now. But it was that was all we knew, so we enjoyed it. And I didn't like going down in the country. I didn't like live farm animals. Out in Garfield, Texas, every Thanksgiving we had to go out there, pick out a turkey. They had a turkey farm, and that was like horrible to me. My mother went fishing, and she would take us fishing. I'd take a book, and they'd do a cookout. I went to eat and read. So my sons say I'm the most unathletic person they've ever met because I never played sports, and they tried to get me to play basketball. It just didn't make sense. So I joined the school band. If you were in the marching band, you didn't have to take PE.
What instrument did you play?
I played the clarinet for the marching band, and then we had the concert band. I played the bass violin. And the main thing I remember is the opposite of the smaller violin.
Yeah.
So, but that was at Keelan, and two of my favorite teachers were the band directors, and it was Alvin Patterson and his brother. I can't think of the brother's name, but it was two of them. It was Alvin and Roy. That was his brother's name. But they taught me something. I saw one of them years later. He said, if you're more than 5 minutes late, don't show up. And I told him, I said, you have created a monster. All my life, I don't like being late. And he just laughed. He said, that's what you remember about me. I said, yes. But no, I loved school in Austin back then. And they actually taught us stuff. I can remember at L.L. Campbell, they would tell us, if you don't have anything for breakfast, eat some leftovers or make you a sandwich, or, you know, they would tell us to eat something for breakfast. So they did not only the educational part of it, but life skills. And I can remember school being like that. So it was nice.
Who were some other favorite teachers at HT or anywhere else you can remember?
Well, I can remember my fourth grade teacher. I had a lady named Mrs. Chase, because I had, in England they call it lazy eye. Over here they call it cross eyes. I had to have surgery on my eyes. So the kids, being lovely as children can be, I've been wearing glasses since I was in kindergarten, I guess. And so they would tease me about that. And she told me, she said, Sarah, you have learning eyes. Don't be upset, you have learning eyes. But she was my fourth grade teacher. And the reason I went into history, I had a couple of history teachers, a lady named Miss Taylor. I wanted to be just like her when I grew up, you know, with history. So, and the English teachers I had were nice too. We had a couple of them who passed away last year. And one of the English teachers, it was a funny last name. It must have been French or something, but like Peak. It was like Pique was her surname. Of course, I'm sure we butchered it as children, but she was another one. She would read books to us, and I do that now when I read out loud. She would do the voice like the people would be talking, and she would read books about the Brazos Bottom, the Brazos River, and she would talk like they would talk. So, but yeah, we had teachers that seemed like they cared. Well, I did. I loved all of my teachers. The only one I didn't really, well, he was nice, but he was a coach. And his mind was not in the classroom with us. It was on the field. And, but he taught math, which wasn't my favorite topic anyway. But it seemed like it was a different field at school. And you sure didn't cut up because they knew where your parents were.
Yeah.
Well, my brothers didn't learn that quickly, but no, I love the school system in Austin.
What's a good memory from HT?
Well, HT was a bit different because that was the first time I met a lot of people from different areas. We had a lot of people from New York, and which my thing was when they were bad-mouthing Texas, go home, and we will not miss you. But most of it was good because I was taking a lot of history courses, and I do my electives in subjects I liked. So I enjoyed the classes and things. I didn't participate in too much. I was in a couple of honor society things. But I didn't ever pledge a sorority or anything. But but I enjoyed it. And with Upward Bounds, we got to go on field trips and things. So it was pretty good. I started out, a couple of summers before I was actually at Houston-Tillotson, living in the dorms during the summer for Upward Bounds, and that was pretty neat.
Yeah. What year did you graduate?
Now we're going way back. I graduated from high school in 1968. Then I graduated from HT in 1972. Graduated from law school in 1975.
Yeah.
So,
you're a lawyer?
Yeah, well, let's say I went to TSU's law school.
Oh, right.
Now, this is a funny story. A real good friend of mine, I've been knowing her over 50 years now, was at UT's law school. She came over to Houston-Tillotson trying to recruit me. And I found, she didn't tell me until a couple of years ago, they actually gave her my name and tried to get her to sign up or apply to go to UT's law school. And when she got to telling me about it, in which I'd already heard some things myself, I said, no, I don't want to go there. So that's how I got to TSU. She said, well, you need to go somewhere. And she got the application, and we filled it out for TSU's law school. So that's how I ended up there. But I was, she didn't tell me for years that they gave her my name, and she came. I thought she was interviewing everybody. But I liked TSU's law school, and it was because my thing, once you get older, you start getting into more grown-up issues, and I didn't want that in school. I go to learn. I didn't want any other issues like race or anything like that. So, but I enjoyed every school I went to, and you learn new things, meet new people. And that's one, I don't have any hobbies. I collect good people.
What did you do after college and law school?
I've had 3 different types of jobs in my life. Teaching school was the first. And I did like that initially. And then it got that no pass, no play. And I felt like a warden down in Huntsville. After I left teaching, I went into adult probation. So I taught 10 plus years. I was adult probation officer 10 plus years. I started seeing some of my former students on probation. I didn't like that. The burnout rate was like 2 years. I stayed 10. And then the last job I got on at the state comptroller's office. And after that, it seemed like I couldn't get away from taxes. So even over in England, I worked at a local tax office. So it was like, from teaching history, working for the probation department, and working with taxes. So just 3 different things in my entire working career. So I just, but in law school, I was going to major in taxation. So although I didn't practice law, I got paid extra money in teaching because it was a JD, and I got paid like to have a doctor's degree. And And then it helped with getting a job with the tax office. So, so I'm glad I went. I didn't want a master's in history. So it all worked out. And I was able, being a single parent for over 20 years, initially I had the summers off and school holidays with the boys. So it worked out.
What schools did you teach at?
Oh my gosh. In Houston, it's really sad. I taught in the Oak Village, I taught at Oak Village Middle School, but it was in the North Forest School District. And Houston took over that district. They had, after I left, they had some problems, and the HISD ended up taking it over. But that school is still there, Oak Village Middle School. And being a glutton for punishment, I came to Austin. I moved back home to be closer to my mother, and I taught out at Porter Junior High. And everybody kept saying, how can you teach junior? I said, I don't know. The 6th graders were my babies, 7th graders were teenagers, and the 8th graders were grown-ups. So I said, I don't know how I could teach middle school, but I like history, so I tried to make it interesting. And what I did for my students, I had friends in other states teaching their state history, so they had pen pals, and I told them, everywhere you go, I tried to teach a bit of pride in Texas for my students to have pride in their home state. So, but yeah, that's about it for my work. And I was one happy soul to retire. I have friends who still say, I miss work. Well, go back then. I don't miss it. Yeah, but I enjoyed it when I had to do it, but I don't miss it. Other thing, my mother decided we needed room to play. I didn't play, but I guess for my brothers. And she bought 2 acres of land, 6303 Wheelcap Road. Now they changed it because she was going by Williams, and there was another family next door named Cabin. So she bought 2 acres, and they changed the name from Tannehill Lane to Will for the Williamses and Cab for the Cabins. She bought that land. I wasn't out there long because I was older. And in fact, I was about to get out of high school and go to HT and stuff. So I grew up out there. But it was 2 acres. It used to be an old farm. It had a water well. It had an orchard. And it was shaped like a capital L. Weirdest thing. It went straight back, and then that tangent turned to the right. So like a big L, capital L, someone had pushed over, and it was flat. But yeah, that was fun to me, but I'm not into the country or the outdoors. My brothers loved it. So that was interesting. I just stayed in the shade if I wasn't indoors. And I mentioned my mother passed away May 8th, 1988, and that was Mother's Day. So this past Mother's Day, May 8th, 2022, it was especially hard because she died on Mother's Day, which I don't like celebrating Mother's Day. My mother used to cook. People would invite her to come and cook when they had parties. And there was one family, I can't remember their name, but they were out on Baum Road. Of course, being the girl, I had to tag along. And she was invited to cook at the governor's mansion. And we were trying to figure out what governor was that. But it was when Randolph Scott, and she got to meet him, which she couldn't stop talking about that. She met John Wayne, and then all these other dignitaries, politicians, and people who would be at the governor's mansion for dinner. And they'd come back in the kitchen, and compliment her cooking and the staff, and she just loved that. So after that, although she had her homemaking or home economics degree, she went to Brackenridge Hospital at night and got a vocational nurse certificate, I guess. So she worked at the hospital for a while. But she was so nice to everybody. I have to admit, I'm not as nice as my mother. I'm nice to people because I like good people, but I don't have tolerance for mean or horrible people. I don't want to be around them. But she was so nice to older people. She'd fill out paperwork, give them a ride to doctors, all kind of, helpful things. And if any of them were hungry or needed food, she would give them our food. But she was just all around good person. And everybody knew Grandma Grace. I tell people Grandma Grace is the most colorful character in our family, and they used to tease me because my middle name is Grace. But everybody knew Grandma Grace. She was born in 1905. She was no nonsense. She owned land. She didn't trust Austin banks, so she had a bank in San Antonio. She had a bank in Temple. She had a bank in Bastrop. We know of those. No telling where else she had a bank. And she didn't drive. So we're all, but she was a character.
Where did she own land?
She owned a couple of different places in Austin, one out for 12th Street near Airport. She owned some land back off of the road between Bastrop and Elgin. How she found that, no one knows. She owned land in San Antonio, had a couple of houses over there. But she would do all this stuff. And she worked like for, in her early years, she did like domestic help. She cooked. She cooked at UT's fraternities, a couple of them out there. She knew the Cisneros brothers, so we had to hear all about them. They walked on water. They were just so lovely. But she was a good cook. And what was weird, her mother's maiden name was Shackleford. My Grandma Grace did British type cooking. She made marmalade. She made just all kind of stuff like that I would eat, mince pies, stuff like that. She just did all kind of cooking. She made all of these different German things. She could make homemade sauerkraut, homemade German sausages. But she was a good cook, and she made these huge cakes and things, like German type cakes, and they would be light as a feather, but some of them were like that. There was several layers, 4 or 5 layers. So it was interesting being around her. And she was from that generation where big was in. So she would always fuss at me and say, "You need to eat. You're too thin. You need to eat." And I always had a big appetite, thankfully. I had good metabolism. But, I tell people she was a colorful character. The kids thought she was mean, but she was just no nonsense. And I tell my sons, they remember her. I said, she was born in 1905. And in my family, people don't understand what some of my friends can't understand with DNA. Grandma Grace could pass for white. Some of her sisters couldn't. And so she was kind of color struck, I thought, in later years. And but she didn't really show it. But in her, and then she thought if you were skinny, you were sick, because she would always stay on me. But because I was named after her, she liked me a bit more than some others in the family. But she was really helpful, but just a bit, I guess, strong-willed. But she was from that generation. And I told my sons, I said, that's the way she grew up, she was raised. And it was a bit of a sad situation with that John B. Simeon. It's my mother's father. Grandma Grace never had any more children. And she had to have her marriage annulled because she was a Catholic. And what happened, she found out that this man had another wife. So they had to, his first wife, so she had to have hers annulled. And after that, she just stayed at home with her parents, and they helped raise my mother. But one of the highlights of my research, because I used to wonder why he never came back to see my mother, but he died from the effects of that mustard gas. And I have a picture of him and a picture of his father, and I met the Simeon relatives in California. They were from Opelousas. They said they were from Opelousas, but they were actually from LeBeau, Louisiana. And they left there and went to the San Francisco area and worked on the Navy, for the Navy. But I was so happy. And that's what I was hoping with some of the other ancestors to get pictures.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that, like with the Horace family, and I didn't send you the pictures, but I have pictures of their gravestones and the family plots and things.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I'll never know how they look.
Yeah.
Because when I first started, I tried to contact them, and they would put the phone down on me. I write them letters, they wouldn't reply, and it's a lot of them still in the area.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the bad things that I'll never get to know. And hopefully someone will follow up after I pass on, because at the moment, none of my relatives are interested in researching. They want to know, they have copies of my books, but they're not willing to do the digging.
Yeah.
And I went off on a tangent.
That's all right. Can you explain to me what you mean by color struck?
Oh my gosh. It's all over the world, actually, because in England, there's so many people from India. But what they do, and now my friend told me about this one. I didn't ever hear this one in Austin, but they had that brown bag thing. But for black people, they were looking at if you were mixed or something in your color, you were lighter, that you were smarter, you got the better jobs or whatever. But in India, they call it colorism over in Europe. And it's just one of those racist type things. Because people tell me I should be lighter. Because from my DNA, I should be lighter. And I told a good friend of mine, but I told her, I said, that's not the way DNA falls. I'm so mixed up with so many different countries. I said, I'm doing good to be here. I said, with all these different countries and stuff, and I think that's why I love Europe. So when I first went, I just loved it. But yeah, my family's pretty mixed up when it comes to DNA. Now, my great-grandfather, Ed Horace, the whole family, they used to call it an oil mill, but it was like a mill on Chicon and 4th Street.
Yeah.
Most of the family, the older ones, were farmers. Some of them came into town later. The women either stayed home or they took in washing. Some of them, like my grandmother's sister, her name was Louise Horace. They called her Aunt Cake. And her other sister named Willie Mae, they called her Aunt Pie. So everybody had a nickname. Of course, with my family, my nickname was Baby Sister. I have cousins who still call me that. So my brothers just call me Sister, among other names I can't mention in mixed company. But yeah, they were, they just did like, I don't want to say manual labor. Now, some of the cousins actually went to school. In my mother's generation, she graduated from college, and a lot of her first cousins did too. But that's because Austin had Tillotson and Sam Houston. So when I came along, I went to, Houston Tillotson. But it seemed like with the generations, in my generation, I'm one of the few who went to college and finished. Uh-huh. So some of my brothers went 2 years, dropped out. One went to a community college, and so they weren't as big on education. I don't really, my sons asked me about that, and I said, I don't know why. I said, but I always wanted to go. I knew I wanted to go to school, and I did.
Did your mother and aunts go to Tillotson or Samuel Houston College?
Now, my mother went to Samuel Houston. Some of the others went to Tillotson. So I was glad they merged, because when I went, it was, Houston Tillotson. But But yeah, I was surprised. One of the cousins was actually a chemist. He's one that had moved to, his mother was my great-grandfather's sister. So she was named Mary Horse. And that's a picture of her. I think I sent you with the long dress on, and really fancy-looking dress. The two that I was really close to, they were my mother's first cousins. They went to Tillerson, and both of them joined the military. One was in the Army, one was in the Air Force. But my cousin, who was, I don't know if I have his picture, but his picture is in the book. His name, well, we called him Junior, but he was Larkin, Larkin, Edwards. And when he was in Vietnam, I used to write him letters. I was the kid who would write letters to all the distant relatives. And so he bought me some silk back from Vietnam, and my mother made my prom dress out of one of the pieces of silk. But no, they were just I don't want to say manual labor, but they did a lot of stuff. And on the Monroes, it was interesting. They were carpenters. They called him Old Man Ed Monroe, but he built a 2-story house down in the country. And when he left that Gonzales area, he had that house moved to Bluebonnet Street in San Antonio. So, but yeah, it was funny. They were carpenters. It was really, and evidently did good work, because they helped build churches and things down in the country. So that was a kind of tricky one for me, because I didn't really see them working. They would go to work, and Frances Dinsmore, after slavery was over, she cooked at the old Austin Hotel downtown. And they said I was lucky enough to get some of her recipes that are in the book. So, but yeah, that's about, what I know about their education and where they worked.
Did they have any family reunions or gatherings outside of the...
No, well, the thing I put down is that we didn't really have officially what would be called a family reunion, but big gatherings for holidays. Also, since there was a lot of the men in the military, when they'd come home, that was like a family reunion. Everybody would show up, or some from out of state would come to visit. And so those were the gatherings when they would get everybody there. Everybody would bring something, or, to me, and sad to say, funerals, that was another big celebration. Reminded me of in New Orleans. They didn't have music and bands and stuff, but there would be a lot of people there. So those were mostly what I remember as celebrations.
You don't have to answer this question, but are there any injustices that you or your family experienced in Austin?
Now, it's none that I know of personally. The only thing that Paul Monroe, who was shot by the police and bled to death, he was a cousin, but I was alive when that happened. I don't remember it. I don't remember. My family was good at being hush-hush about certain things. And for example, in Cuero, Texas, one of my ancestors' brothers was lynched. I can't find only one person, my grandma Zora in San Antonio, her sister mentioned it in some of her writings. I can't find anything about it. Nothing. I've called down to Cuero, I've been down to Cuero. All our papers got washed away in the flood.
What?
But
What was his name?
I don't know. Now his sister was Emily. She's the one from Holland.
Yeah.
So I don't even know his name. And it's really weird. On her death certificate, her son filled it out. He put for the father's name, he put Lee, but she was, I found on Ancestry as a hint, her name was like, it was different. I put it on there. It was a different spelling, but that lady had so many names. She was working in the house, but she got pregnant by one of the slaves, and they kicked her out of the big house. She was a Whittington, which was the first man. She was a Johnson. She was a Graves, and she ended up something else, Allen or something. And I'm like, and when I started the research, I thought her maiden name was Johnson, but she had the Whittington, and the old people in my family never took me down in the country. You know, some of the brothers and cousins, the boys went, but I never went down there. So by the time I went, you know, it's no one to really talk to or ask. So, but I thought that was interesting. The only thing, remember when you were bringing me back, we passed by, I told you it was the old Starks grocery store. Well, right behind it was a house. And once again, black people on one side of Chicon, it was white people on the other side. And it's only between 19th Street and Manor Road. And those kids used to call, my brothers would walk me to school, and I must have been about 5 or 6, and they would call us names. I didn't know what they were saying, and I went home and asked my mother, and she told me, you know, what the N-word was, what it meant. That was the only thing as a child, and it was other children doing it. Of course, I know they got it from their parents, but mostly no problems growing up in Austin. So, but that was a weird neighborhood, and we all usually got along too. It was just that one incident, and I don't know if my mother went up there and talked to them, but they didn't do it again. So I was pretty fortunate, and we were, because we played with those kids, not that group, but the ones like across from us. I knew everybody's name. They knew our name. If they wanted something, like neighbors used to do, if they needed sugar or something, they'd come over and they were just part of the neighborhood. So, so I guess I was pretty fortunate.
Off the question list, I met one of your possibly neighbors. His name was George Wallace. He still lives at 20th and Alamo.
Oh my God.
He's still there.
Oh my, how funny.
Do you remember him?
Yes. That was another nice thing about growing up in Austin. You knew your neighbors. Yeah. All up and down Paquita Street, I knew everybody. And they knew me, of course. Don't dare do anything, because they would, you know, before you made it home, they'd get word to my mother or Grandma Grace. So you had to watch your P's and Q's growing up in a neighborhood. But yeah, I remember people who stayed up the hill and, you know, all around the corner. And I had my classmates. We all lived in the same neighborhoods. So that's, oh my goodness. Yeah, that is something. I say those were the good old days.
Which of these amazing ancestors are buried in Oakwood?
Now, the weird thing, when I came over and looked, I only have 2 sets of ancestors, the Horace ancestors and the Shackleford. When the caretaker showed me around, we found Jack Shackleford and Mary Jane Shackleford. Oh, I forgot, Jack Shackleford worked at that rock quarry off of the old 19th, is it 19th? Or 2? Yeah, it's 19th Street, where that train track is. Mm-hmm. That was still there when I was a child, but he worked there. But yeah, Jack and Mary Jane Shackleford are buried in the old grounds. But Lewis Horace and his wife, they called her Mary, but her name was Margarita or something like that. They're buried over, you know, on the other side. And that's what's funny to my friends. We got the slave owners over on the south side, former slaves over on the north side. But those are the only two ancestors that I know of that are buried here. So, because my family is quite a few in Bethany.
Yeah.
And my mother and Grandma Grace is actually buried in Evergreen. But there's only a few in Plumbers. But yeah, they're just, because they were just in this area for so long. And now Frances Dinsmore was born in 1842, and she was a few years older than Charles Horse. But at UT, they have quite a bit of information about Lewis Horse. He came in like 1830-something to Texas through Louisiana. They came on a boat to Louisiana and then on up to Texas. But he was a butcher by trade. And at UT, they donated his papers and stuff, and they had a nice write-up in the newspaper when he passed away. But he was a colorful character after reading about the write-up about it. But he donated everything. And the only thing, I don't know if it was Frances Dinsmore, but over at UT in the library, they have a paper where he purchased a negress. No name or anything, but I always wondered, was it Frances Dinsmore? So, and that was only mention of a slave. And a lady told me at the Austin History Center who was helping me with the research, and it was weird to me, I never thought about it, those slaves could speak German. And I said, I never even thought about that. And Grandma Grace could cook that German food. She was really a good cook, but all of that stuff. So, you know, it's just amazing, some of the stuff I didn't really think about. As a child, I didn't think about it at all. But yeah, they said they knew how to speak German.
If you could send a message to your ancestors to tell them something or to ask them something, what might that be?
Okay, now what I felt like I would want to tell them, that we would always remember them and cherish them. And just thank them for all the hard work and sacrifices they made for us. So, and that's one of the reasons I wanted it in print, so people won't forget.
If you could send a message to someone 100 years in the future from now, what would you have to say?
Now I changed this today, but I had said, you know, to always take the high road. Remember us both in your thoughts and good deeds, and I was thinking today that for them to continue looking, because there's so many unanswered things, for them to not only carry on the family name and values, but continue looking for some of the unanswered things. You know, hopefully one of these days break through that brick wall and find out some more things. Because I feel like we have relatives out there we don't know. There are a lot of cousins. I did a research thing on cousins, and there's so many people who are kin to us that we don't know.
What currently interests you?
Oh dear. I do love reading. The family research, although I'm not as active as I used to be, I don't want to sit there, because I could sit there for hours. So I try to be, you know, not do it as much or as long a periods as I used to. And I also like to travel, although I don't really travel much like before the pandemic. And as I mentioned, I don't have any real habits. I just collect good people. So that's about it. I know that's not an exciting life.